Okay, so field variables. So field variables, this is including fields in your emails, but also not just emails, but also PDFs. So you can include these fields in your emails or your PDFs, and in fact, some other places as well. So at the we do actually allow you to use some fields when it comes to some payment method pages too. So that's just another area where you can use these variables. These variables are quite tightly linked as well to exports because you can specify different fields to export. So there's all this connection between these things. So field variables, great for emails, great for PDFs, great for being able to export this data as well, quite useful. Going to look at the two widgets. This is where the two widgets are. I thought they were earlier, but no, here they are. We're going to look at two widgets. We're going to look at the quick and the reference widget. Okay, so quick reference. There's a quick widget that comes up and then disappears. That's the one I've shown you when I was talking about emails. And there's a reference widget, which basically can stay on the screen and you can copy the stuff over as you need it, copy the fields over. We're going to look at field variables substituted for, the field variables are substituted for the field value. So as you put the square bracket field in, that actually gets substituted with for the value that's found on the various forms in the system. So like I say, it's like a mail merge. So you mail merge these variables into the email or into the PDF as they're being generated. I'm going to look at standard field variables, which are consistent throughout the whole system. I'm also going to look at generated system raw and logins. Okay, so these are generated variables versus system raw and logins. You don't worry about the names, you're going to get to know them in a moment. We're going to look at dates and time, which are a common variable used within course sales. There's a big variety of those. And we're going to look at price detail and document topic summary. So price detail, of course, gives you things like that are relevant for an invoice, and a price. Document topic summary give you information around the units of competency that are going to be completed by the customer, by the student. Okay, so there's two widgets. That widget there, that's the one I talked about. That's the quick widget. That's when you click on this little plus button here and you get this select a field widget. That's the one that inserts and then that disappears once you've done that. This is the reference widget. It's a bit grayed out here, but you get the idea. If you click on this fields button, up pops this little widget. You can choose a record type, or if you don't know what record type it is, but you know what the field is, just type something in the search here. It'll search all of the possible fields that you can use and give you a list of all of them. So if you wanted to search date, for example, type in date and you get all the fields that are related to dates. Keep in mind though, we've got course dates, so there might be quite a few fields that come up as a result of that. But you can type in time and name, all those sorts of things will work in this field reference list here. A little bit different here. You actually have to select your record type and know where it is. Here you can do a bit more of a detailed search. So there are standard variables, and these variables are, these are the ones you're commonly going to be using. So for example, under documents, we've got a client given name. Just be aware, you see how this has content decoded, then there's a number after it. That means it's actually a generated field, okay? So it's a generated field by the system, and the system generates these fields when it creates course sales. So when you either create the field or when course sales is generated, when you sign up to it, these fields are generated, okay? So these are generated fields. They've got numbers after them. These actually represent the field IDs of the particular variable. So we've got the name of the field at the top there, and then we've got this sort of decoded funny name that represents that particular field. So the generated field variables look like this. Here we go, these generated variable fields, so you've got these numbers after them, and that says decoded in it as well. And you've got the system field variables. They look something like this. They don't have any numbers in them. You've just got the words. And this one in particular is the document external ID. And sometimes the names are very clear what they're going to be. Okay, so sometimes names are obvious. External ID makes sense. It's the external identifier for the document in this case, which is that number that includes the letters and the mix. I think it's about 8 or 9 different letters and numbers that are mixed up. That's the external ID. That's the reference to any enrollment or any statement of attainment that we send out. Now you can look in decoded versus raw. Okay, so decoded versus raw. Now don't worry about these funny names that they're using. But basically, decoded just has that decoded bit in it, whereas raw does not. Now, what's the difference? What the heck is a decoded versus a raw? Well, a decoded is when we have to display a list of variables on the form. We'll often have a number in the background or some value in the background that represents the label. Okay, so we disassociate the number from the label. And that means that we can make updates to the label and it won't affect the underlying data that's stored with all the other records that we've got in the system. So an example down here is that we've got AU, which might be the raw portion, the raw value, and we've got Australia, which represents the decoded. So while AU can represent Australia, Australia is the decoded version and AU is the raw version of that value. And this can be useful because if you want to generate, say, a link to let's say you're sending an email to a trainer, and you want to generate a link to move them back into a particular part within course sales, sometimes the raw value is what you want to use. So there are uses for this. It just happens that most of the time you're going to want to use the decoded value because you're mostly communicating with your customer and they're used to seeing Australia, not AU. So that sort of makes sense that they want to do that. Now, logins are a little bit different because logins have an extra level. So we have logins, but logins aren't enough. We actually need to know about the roles. So it's not good enough just to know about the logins and include the first name or the last name. We actually need to know which role are we talking about, which is in the maybe a link to the course date or link to the course master. So you can see here with this animation, we've got a process when we're using the quick widget. We click on logins. There we go. Let's do it again. So we're going to click on the little button there, click on select, choose logins. As a result, this little extra one comes up, says record. So these are the records are roles. And then we choose the data, which is the, so in this case, the given name of a particular role. So if we wanted to send an email to the trainer, we can send an email to the trainer. If we want to send an email to the agent, we can send an email to the agent or to the branch, whoever. We can even include other information from those login records as well. So you can see there it's quite useful, that concept of using logins. And as a result, the variables that you see between the square brackets, they look a little bit different, don't they? They've got the logins, they've got the number, and then we've got the actual name of the field that we want to display. This is like a system style field, but just a little bit more advanced or more complicated. Okay, so dates and times. So let's look at dates and times. Best way to do it, like I said, is you type in time and you can get into that, and that's into that sort of more persistent, more the field button beside emails or beside when you're editing PDFs, and you can type in time and you get this big list. You see, you click on fields, don't choose a record type, just type in time here, and you get a big list here of all the different times you have access to. And you know, sometimes just practice. You could even copy an entire text there into an email, send it to yourself, and then have a look at it and see what times come up and what you expect. And if those times don't actually match what you expect, then maybe you're better off choosing another value. And so this can be a good way. In fact, this is what we do to test all this. We actually basically copy all of those variables in and see what fields come up and whether those fields are the fields that we'd expect to come up when the system replaces them. So this is dates and times. So here's some dates. Here's a variety of different dates that you might be interested in. So these are the names of the fields. So if you were to type these in, they should come up in your search. Okay, some of them are pretty obvious. So course start date, course end date, date of birth. Now activity start date, activity end date, they are the dates related to the activity, namely the activities carried out by the topics. Okay, so that's the first start date of your topics that you have linked on a particular document and the last date on the topics. Ooh, got lots of people calling me. And the last date we've got on the document topics there attached to the documents. They've got the status timestamp. Now this can be quite useful. The status is the application of a process step. So if you apply a process step within course sales, you're updating the status of the document. Now, when that is done, we have a timestamp associated with it. So updating the status will be when the step is applied. And obviously the date and time will include more information, and then the date only in the user time zone. So we actually use the user time zone of the one that's applied that step. So if you've applied that step, then you're going to get the date that is relevant for your particular time zone. And because course sales by default works on Universal Standard Time, and so that's the date that is considered to be used. But if you want to use the date that's applicable to the user and when you send the email, then sometimes that can be useful, particularly when we're so close to the date line, I think it's called. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. So you can vary those and try them out and see which one works for you. Now times, again, we've got a big variety of different times here. We've got a variety of format times. We've got a variety of timestamp submitted and timestamp created, and that's when the document is created or the document is submitted when looking at timestamp. And these are put into context because you look at that underneath the document section within those variable widgets. And of course, what activity start time and activity end time, they can be quite useful because you can vary those on a per course date basis. They should get displayed in your WordPress plugin as well. So they can be consistently used in your emails and on your WordPress plugin. Okay, so moving on now to price detail. So these are all the different variables. I've just picked out some of the key ones that are maybe a little bit different to what you might expect. So price detail, look, your go-to place here is your invoice table. So if you want to create an invoice table is the way to go. And in fact, just as a little bit of a tip here, if you want to have a look at your invoice table for any of your existing documents, click on the little cog that's in the blue bar. That is really useful way to see that information. Just hang on a second here. I've got some. Sorry, getting distracted here. So that's a pretty useful way of getting to the right. So this is a pretty good way of getting the invoice nice and neatly constructed for you, okay? So the invoice table is the place to go to for that. But there's a whole lot of fields in price detail that you can use, a lot of variables you can use in there. And that can be creating links to make online payments and a variety of different things. So there's a big variety of price fields that you could use under price detail. And finally, I'm going to talk about document topic summaries. Now, this is to do with units of competency and statements of attainment. So this is to do with being able to get a record of all those topics that people have got an outcome for. So you give them an outcome of past, and that past outcome is then used to create the statement of attainment lists for the units of competency that are applicable. So statements of attainment, or rather topics that are on the documents that don't have an outcome, they effectively won't be included in any of these variables. If they have an outcome, then they'll be included, but only if they're a pass and they're suitable for being included. Obviously, failures aren't included on the statement of attainments, and neither are they included on record of results. Okay, so you've got a few others in there. You've got activity start date, activity end date. Again, these are the start dates and the start times, etc., that you can use to specify when the units of competency were completed, when the units of competency or the dates were started as well. So they're pretty helpful. I've got some useful guides there. I'm just going to leave those there. I'll probably include them in the YouTube posting of this session. And if you want to visit those, you can. Best way to do is just visit coursesales.com/guides and then type in the fields that if you're interested in variables, type in variables or fields, or type in emails and PDFs. There's a lot of cross-linking between these documents, so you should be able to find these files pretty straightforward and pretty quickly. Okay, so here we go. Here's a quiz. What are the variables used to determine the correct value when using a field from a login? Okay, what are the variables used to determine the correct value when using a field from a login. Okay, so you might remember that widget that came up, and there were 3 different items there we had to choose. Which are they? Are they the login, name of person, and field? Are they the login, role, and data field? Is it the role and person name, or is it the course date, field, and data? Let's see who hasn't fallen asleep during the discussion of field variables, which is highly entertaining as a topic. So what do we use to determine the correct value when using a field from a login? In other words, how do you make sure you're putting the correct variable in there? How do we make sure we're putting the correct field variable in there and we're selecting it from that widget? Let's click on the button just to make sure we get it. We're looking at the login, then the role, then the data field. That's it. Well done, Stacey. So login, role, and the data field. We don't know the person's name yet. We don't know that. Course date, that's a throwaway one, that is. You know, in multi-choice, there's always one question you can immediately remove as being a potential option, and that's that one. And of course, we don't know the name of the person, so it can't be either A or C. Okay, so are you more likely to use decoded or raw variables? So think of it as I think about this as, would you eat raw meat or cooked meat? Think about that way. You're more likely to use decoded. In other words, cooked meat, I think, is decoded is the one that we'll use. Raws are less likely to be used. So decoded is the way to go. Okay, so when creating a statement of attainment, which would you not use? Hopefully this is going to be pretty obvious, because just one of these options doesn't actually say attainment in it. So it's a record of results. Yeah, that's the one. Well done, guys. Okay. So the quickest way to create an invoice template is, hopefully I've pushed this home. We didn't used to have the invoice template back in the bad old days. We just used to have all the fields, and people would construct the templates, construct the invoices, and oh my gosh, was it a nightmare. So it's pretty exciting that we've now got them all working pretty well. Nice, pretty template for people to use. So I would suggest use B. I think B is going to be the right answer here. Yes, B, definitely. You've got flexibility to create customer. Yeah, and you do have the flexibility to create it if you want to. But I was looking for the quickest way to create an invoice template. And and you can make up a table. So you can construct a table and you can put all the fields in the right spot. But this invoice table field, that'll actually recreate it for you automatically. And it's just one variable that you use, which is pretty handy. Okay. So something I think maybe if you want to do this later, create a step that sends yourself an email and include all of the variables in it, and then have a look and see what happens. Have a look at what ends up appearing, and that can be your reference point. You can go, okay, oh, that's what appears when I use that variable. You know, I can talk as much as I can about it, but there are so many variables, I couldn't possibly go through them all. So it can be pretty useful for you to basically give it a go and see how they look for you.